I believe that what we are confronting is not simply the agenda of what might be called secular transnationalists, whose program has been exemplified by the United Nations as often being advanced through its various vehicles, treaties, conventions, and the like. But there is a parallel effort that I think, for want of a better term, you might call religious transnationalism, that is working in insidious ways to promote a similar, albeit in important respects different, agenda. The secular transnationalists associated, again, most especially with the UN, have in mind a world ordered by them, the UN bureaucrats most especially, and their associates and similarly minded elites in various nations around the world. The religious transnationalists have in mind a global program also. They typically call it the caliphate. And they're seeking to bring it about in a variety of ways in the interest of establishing not a global UN bureaucracy, to be sure, but a global theocracy under which Sharia law, as they call it, will be imposed on Muslims and non-Muslims alike. One of the attributes of Sharia is that it demands of its adherents that they engage in jihad. Jihad is, of course, best known to the extent it's understood at all as a violent set of activities. Suicide bombers, people flying planes into buildings, murdering in a random way innocent civilians, often it's not. Newt Gingrich made a very important address last Thursday at the American Enterprise Institute, in which he emphasized very helpfully that the violent strain of jihad has a counterpart. If you will, you might think of it as a kind of pincer movement. The violent combined with a more stealthy, what's been called civilizational jihad, or stealth jihad, has exactly the same purpose, which is to bring about this sort of global order of caliphate under Sharia, but differences in the tactics by which that end state is to be achieved. And the worrying thing about what Newt has called the stealth Sharia, or the creeping Sharia, is in many cases it is being insinuated in ways that are seemingly innocuous, or at least of no sufficient concern to warrant direct opposition. Sharia, this theopolitical legal program, into countries like ours, through the sort of central bloodstream of our nation, our economy, namely our capitalist system. And they're doing that through what is known as Sharia-compliant finance. I'm fond of saying that the first clue that there is a problem here is the first word. And in fact, the purpose of Sharia-compliant finance is to legitimate and to facilitate this insinuation of the larger program into nations like ours. This has been going on for some time. It is basically a recent phenomenon, though. It started in the 1940s when the Muslim Brotherhood cooked this up as a means of bringing about the end state that they seek. It really kicked into high gear, though, as oil prices escalated, and suddenly much of our national treasure was in the hands of people who sought to inflict Sharia upon us. And in the interest of recycling all those petrodollars, our government has embraced Sharia-compliant finance. To the point where every one of you are now part owners of the largest single purveyor of Sharia-compliant insurance products in the world. It's called AIG. We have billions of dollars in AIG now, some of which are being used to promote Sharia and Sharia-compliant finance. Now, concerns about both of these phenomena, the effort to bring Sharia here, to have it imposed in unconstitutional ways, including by the breakdown of the separation of church and state, which I think is inherent in our ownership of a company that is promoting a religion, or at least this political program that masquerades as a religion. These are important tests of our system of government, whether we will tolerate this kind of threat, whether we will accede to it, as its proponents clearly intend. And interestingly enough, I speak to you now at a moment in time when we may be roughly 48 to 36 hours away from giving an individual who is arguably the largest single non-Muslim enabler of Sharia a permanent lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court of the United States. Her name is Elena Kagan. And as Dean of the Harvard University Law School, she has been a prime mover behind the legitimation and promotion of Sharia in this country. You would not know this from what has passed for an inquiry into her thinking, her judicial temperament, as they say, that has been going on in the United States Senate for the past month or so. And I have to say to you, I find it absolutely appalling that that is the case. Some have justified, I think, what has amounted to little more than a show of an inquiry, on the grounds that, well, we're just swapping out one leftist justice for another. Ladies and gentlemen, we have never in the history of this country had as a justice of the Supreme Court an admirer of, let alone a promoter of, Sharia. And all of the things being equal, we shortly will, perhaps for the next 30 years. And I emphasize this because if you heard what I was saying a moment ago, there are at least two cases that are likely to come before the Supreme Court on which she may serve. One will involve testing the constitutionality of efforts now being made at the state level, Oklahoma notably, Tennessee, New King, which is called for one at the federal level, that enjoins courts from using Sharia law in their judicial deliberations. This is important because, as you mentioned, you may have heard this, recently a judge in New Jersey, state judge, said that a woman who was being systematically raped and tortured by her husband in America had no protection because he was doing it in accordance with what he thought was his religious belief system. He calls it Sharia. And so did the judge. Fortunately, the judge has been overturned on appeal, as one would hope, But the fact that he even ruled in that fashion is an indicator of how far along we are in the insinuation of these foreign legal systems, which Elena Kagan, just read you this quote, the mission statement of the Islamic Legal Studies program at Harvard University, which she established as dean, is, quote, to promote a deep appreciation of Islamic law as one of the world's major legal systems. Think about it. A brutal, barbaric, totalitarian, misogynistic. You talk about the treatment of women. To say nothing of homosexuals or people who have the temerity to leave the faith. Capital offenses. Floggings, stonings, amputations for petty offenses. This is the practice of Sharia. And to think that somebody who may hold this incredible high office with the ability to influence our lives, not just our fellow justices, but our lives, our Constitution, our freedoms, has not even been asked a single question about this relationship to Sharia. It is a travesty. I fear it will cost us dearly. Let me leave you with just one thought. This is serious business. Newt Gingrich has, and I commend him for it, called for a national debate about the extent to which these kinds of issues are going to be allowed to continue to be insinuated into this country until, unfortunately, the adherents, the promoters of them, succeed in mutating this land, like so many others, beyond recognition. Whether they do it through the two cases, and I got off the track here, two cases that Elena Kagan may have to rule on, one involving this question of prohibiting Sharia from being used in our court system. The other, the AIG matter. There's a federal court case right now in the Eastern District of Michigan, expecting a ruling any day, on whether it is constitutional for our government to own a company promoting Sharia or any religious practice. I submit to you a small step in trying to ensure that this kind of international legal infringement and ultimately seditious undermining of our country will not be something promoted by Elena Kagan in the United States Supreme Court. Will depend on whether she recuses herself from any court case that involves matters on which she so clearly has now established a conflict of interest. I encourage you to join us in trying to make sure that that kind of recusal is forthcoming. Thank you very much.